Everybody, welcome back to the channel and the show. I am JP, your host, and here we talk about all things education and education adjacent. This week, I wanted to start off by talking about OSHA. And for anybody who doesn't know, OSHA stands for Occupational Safety and Health. Now, this is pretty benign to a lot of people because it's existed in most of our lifetimes. It got passed into law in 1970 by Nixon with bipartisan support. And what does it do? It does stuff like make sure people wear hard hats at construction sites, and it forces employers to keep a more safe workplace. Right? We had a lot of that stuff going on prior to the time. A lot of fatalities at work and people getting injured. So there was an act to mitigate that, which I think the vast majority of people would go, yeah, that makes sense. But it actually didn't make a lot of sense at all to Representative Biggs from Arizona, who in the last couple of weeks have put forward legislation to end OSHA. Truly bizarre. And why would he want to do that? It's so just kind of crazy. But the argument's the same as for everything else. States' rights. The states can do it. I think people know what states' rights means. And it really is to set the stage for a race to the bottom. I don't believe there's any way that Representative from Arizona thinks that this is going to help workers. I don't think he's even pretending that it's going to help workers. It's only going to create a scenario where employers get to do less. That's really all this is meant to do. And you think to yourself, why would you want that? It actually goes in line with this kind of rugged, kind of individualistic, I have no obligation to you and figure it out, or this kind of Hunger Games highway existence that a certain segment of elected officials seem to really desperate to drive us to. But it's not only them. I want to play this clip from Michael Sandel, who wrote the book, The Tyranny of Merit. I know I talk about another book called The Myth of Meritocracy, both good, both worth reading, without doubt. So he was giving an interview, and I'll set this up for you. He was giving an interview recently to a Canadian television channel, and I think he dropped a couple of gems that are worth hearing. So the story goes, he's in an elevator, and I will link to the entire interview in the description. But he's in Florida, and he runs into this woman on the elevator. She is from Iowa. She asks where he's from, and he says he's from Boston, which is setting off all manner of red flags to her, apparently, because she turns to him and says, we can read in Iowa, which of course has him aghast because nowhere did he insinuate anything at all, let alone that you couldn't read. But he goes on to explain what I think a lot of us think of as idiosyncratic kind of thinking about voting, depending on who we're talking about, certain segments of the population, who they vote for and why they say they vote for these people. But he explains something here that I think is really important. So take a listen.
This takes us back, Steve, to the conversation we were having about the politics of identity. And this was not about woke identity. This was about the sense that many working people, many people who live in rural areas or in the middle of the country, that coastal elites, credentialed elites, well-educated elites look down on them. And this is what I've called the tyranny of merit, the way in which the sense among many of the winners of globalization have not been content only with the winnings, but also want to claim that their winnings are their due, that their success is their own doing, the measure of their merit. And so it's interesting that she said, we can read in Iowa, which shows that the resentment against elites is not against elites who are in business or wealthy, as Trump is wealthy. It's resentment against credentialed elites, against meritocratic elites, who many people feel look down on them. And so one way of summing it up is that the market-driven version of hyperglobalization deepened the divide between rich and poor. But The meritocratic hubris of the successful during that same period is what created the divide between winners and losers. That's the divide that's toxic to our politics,
Mm.
that polarizes us. And that recognition, I think, should be the starting point for a bold project of democratic renewal that I hope will lead to a new definition, a more energized uh, definition of what progressive politics can be.
Now, for me, that was important for two reasons. The first reason is he gets at what people like to say when people vote against their interests, kind of a thing. Like he explains what we think of as kind of weird voting patterns. Like, well, why would they be voting for him? He's rich, and if they don't like rich people, like they don't like a particular kind of rich person. And that particular that's meritocratic person that Michael Sandel is talking about, who I refer to oftentimes, you'll hear me talk about them as like the sweatshirt people who are very invested in credentialing that way. They also, as he describes, have that individualistic streak. So it really, as far as I'm concerned, the idea that Republicans are like states' rights and individual people can do it on their own, individual states can do it on their own. They don't need the federal government bucking, coming in there and like messing up their mojo. Meritocratic adults kind of agree with that. They're softer on the edges, right? But just based on his description, right? They think it's their due. Like they, underneath it all, have a very similar disposition. And that's why you get them not paying taxes. Like, look at the screenshot from our from the non-existent Doge department that's acting like it's real, right? It is a kind of zero self-awareness. To him, it's deserved. He doesn't think anything's wrong with it because there's no possible way you could say that while taking all of those tax cuts, but they do, and they all do. Private schools also do this. I'm going to put these two things up next to each other, and you're going to see what I mean. So here you have the state giving them aid, and the state trying to get some kind of accountability, and they sue. All of these people have the same bad idea. And if we're trying to understand it, I feel like we're going to have to like, what keeps this thing going? Right? Same thing they asked about investing in the stock market. Like everybody knows this is a horribly corrupt thing to do, but nothing's happening, right? Because they both have the same idea. And it's some of these same ideas are going to have to be shaken off if anything's going to happen. That's positive. Like you can't have your cake and eat it too. And you're going to have to figure out which thing you give up. You can't keep on going like this. Like people can see. The hypocrisy can't stand much longer. This made me think of what rights people have, who has them, and right to do what, rights to avoid what. And I made this piece 2 or 3 years ago. I can't remember the exact time. But what he said had me thinking about it when I read about the OSHA thing and all these come together. And it's sort of like, it's your rights. Your rights are in their way. And across the board, whether it's OSHA or your desire to see where your money is going as you subsidize all of these places, they're pushing back against all of it. And that is the mentality that we're going to have to fight. The rights cannot be the thing that have to be sacrificed for progress. That's not true. Because it's why you're seeing the assault on OSHA, the Department of Education, whose primary role was to secure federal rights for students. That's an impediment. Unions, same thing, your right to collectively bargain, and that job is near complete. It's not done, but it's near complete, and it's going to take some serious action to keep it going. All of these things are about regular people having some semblance of dignity in their life as they maneuver it. And all of these things by this group of people are impediments. And that's the thing we're going to have to work around. And you can't really work around, you're going to have to work through. And people are going to have to own up to it. Like there's no more gaslighting people about this. So those are my thoughts for this week. I appreciate you staying around and listening to it. If anything resonated with you, Please feel free to drop me a comment, click all the usual buttons, and I will see you next time.